Dear friends, I am Dr. Urmi Satyan. Today I will talk about Hard Times, the novel by Charles Dickens. Let us first understand the historical background of the novel. The novel is located in the 18th century provincial town of England. It was in this century, that is from 1760 to 1850, that England had witnessed enormous rise of industries and factories that overpowered most of the domestic sources of income. The cottage industry could not survive against the machines producing goods on a massive scale. For example, no manpower was needed to remove fibers and seeds from cotton as it was easily and speedily done by machines. The poor villagers did not have work and the factories needed laborers. This demand and supply situation encouraged a mass movement of workers from rural to urban areas in hope and search of work and livelihood. Such human movements affected the society to a greater scale. There was a remarkable increase in the mining, steel, and textile industries. Eventually, there was noticed a visible change in the living pattern of the society. The smoke emitted from factories increased pollution which deteriorated health of people. Child labor also grew to meet the pace of the industrial produce. Malnutrition, unemployment, depression were the byproducts of the Industrial Revolution that further divided society into classes of rich and poor, competent and dependent, or, it will not be wrong to say, exploiter and exploited. The former could never understand the miseries of the latter, and it became clear and evident that the Great Britain was passing through hard times. This phase of England is well captured by Charles Dickens in one of his novels titled as Hard Times. I personally recognize Dickens as the spokesperson of the 18th century. In all his novels, Dickens acquaints his readers to the harsh realities of the prevalent time. We can get the exact account of the socio-political situation of the 18th century from one of his novels titled as A Tale of Two Cities. This novel starts with a proclamation. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. This quote is a perfect example to understand the chaos, conflict, and distress prevalent in the time. With this historical background, let us now discuss the plot of the novel. Dickens is a thorough realist, as we all know. He presents a society that pays the price of the extreme rationalism. The novel is developed in the backdrop of a fictional village named Cocktown. Cocktown precisely exhibits the machine-controlled life of the 18th century England. The plot of the novel revolves around Thomas Gradgrind, a retired wealthy merchant who is extremely rational by his temperament and action. He loves facts and nothing else. According to his rationalism, it is not sufficient to recognize a horse only as an animal, but it must be defined more precisely as a quadruped, graminivorous with 40 teeth, namely 24 grinders, 4 eye teeth, and 12 incisive. How ridiculously he loves facts. With this maddening passion for facts, Thomas Gradgrind establishes a school where he forces students to wean off their imaginative skills and equip themselves with rational thinking. Gradgrind has a sickly wife and 2 children named Louisa and Tom. Gradgrind's utter rationalism adversely affects his children's lives. Louisa succumbs to his father's hedonistic temperament that compels her to marry Bounderby, who is a middle-aged rich man with the ownership of a factory and a bank. Unlike his sister, Tom evades his father's extreme rationalism and turns out to be a rogue. The subplot of the novel revolves around the labor class people like Stephen Blackpool, Rachel, and Slackbridge. Stephen is married to a woman who is drug addict, quarrelsome, and remains away from home for months together. Stephen loves Rachel, who is also a factory worker. Stephen consoles Bounderby to get divorced from his wife. Bounderby does not leave this chance to make him feel inferior by saying that taking divorce is a prerogative of only rich people. How insanely self-occupied the rich class is. One more character is a young man, James Harthouse, who comes to Cocktown from London. He impresses Gradgrind and becomes a member of parliament at Cocktown. He also develops interest in Louisa and makes all the possible efforts to impress her with an intention to seduce her. Slackbridge wants to form a union, but Stephen does not join him. This gesture of Stephen impresses Louisa, but the laborers cast him out and Bounderby fires him when he refuses to keep a watch over the laborers' activities. Tom plays a prank on him and asks him to wait near Bounderby's bank for some invisible help. Stephen does so for few nights, but does not find any help and with disappointments leaves Cocktown. The bank is robbed and Stephen is suspected as he was found rallying around the bank. The bank is actually robbed by Tom to pay off his gambling debts. On the other side, Mrs. Gradgrind dies after a long disease. This distresses Louisa. She loses control and unleashes her anger on her father. She blames him for ruining the lives of all the three of them, her mother, Tom, and herself. She says, "I curse the hour in which I was born to this destiny." By the end of the novel, we see that Gradgrind finds himself at no ends and his conscience is challenged to know that Tom has become a gambler and a robber and has run away to England. Tom realizes his mistakes, but he dies an untimely death and never returns to meet his family. Later we see that Bounderby also dies in the streets of Cocktown. Louisa does not remarry. Thomas Gradgrind is left to connect the dots of his rationalism and see the fatal result of it. He gives up his philosophy of rationalism and devotes his time to love and care for poor people. Mr. Gradgrind's keynote address to his students at the very outset of the novel is specifically about facts. It is through this speech that Dickens sets the tone of the novel and prepares us to explore the role of facts in human life. The reading of the novel shows that factories add not only economic value but also social repute to the people of Cocktown. Factory owners were respected in the society, so much so that Gradgrind marries off his daughter Louisa to Bounderby only because he is rich. The fact that he is rich is more valued than the fact that he is almost double the age of Louisa. Louisa's character is replicated in that of Stephen, one of the labor class employee. Both Louisa and Stephen lead unhappy married lives, and both fail to unite to their respective love interests. The society that they live in is unconcerned to their disappointments. Both are forced to sacrifice their personal choices to meet the demands of the social structure. Similarly, Tom's life is wasted too. He runs away from Cocktown and dies an untimely death. Bounderby dies of a sudden attack of fits. Stephen dies with a wrong accusation of robbery, and Mrs. Gradgrind dies in absence of the familial warmth. James Harthouse's strategies fail, and so he also leaves Cocktown. The cruelest irony of Mr. Gradgrind's life is projected in the chapter titled as Philosophical. We see that Gradgrind begs for Tom's life to his one-time ideal student Bitzer. The scene takes place when Gradgrind pleads to Bitzer to save Tom from Bounderby's grip, whereas Bitzer has a plan to deliver Tom over to Bounderby and thus get a chance of promotion in his factory. When Gradgrind miserably asks Bitzer whether his heart is accessible, Bitzer, with all the knowledge of rationality learnt from Gradgrind, replies that his heart is accessible to reason and not to any compassionate influence. Gradgrind's philosophy of rationalism sees a mirror reflection in Bitzer's unaffected rigidity. Dickens very ironically titles the chapter of Hard Times as Sowing, Reaping and Garnering. Gradgrind's irreversible loss is nothing but the account of his rigid rationality. He reaps and garners whatever he has sown in his life. We sympathize with him, but we cannot defend him. The novel ends with the author's direct advice to the readers to wisely strike a balance between two fields of actions. These two fields can be family and work, imagination and fact, compassion and reason, personal as well as social. Dickens advises all of us to work for the overall well-being of the society. I hope this lecture will be helpful to you. Thank you very much.